What's good, everyone? Welcome back to the show Recap with Mo, where we getting ready to get into, look, I don't even know how I got in this, but we in it now, right? Now, I know y'all already looking at the thumbnail like, what in the heck is going on, Mo? Listen, I'm going to tell y'all what happened and how I got into it. But before we get into this thing, make sure to like and subscribe to this channel so you don't miss shit snit that's going down, all right? So, long story short, I made a wager with my wife. Now, she's been trying to get me to watch this show Bridgerton for a while, and I ain't gonna lie to y'all, I've been real hesitant. Now, if I could be transparent with y'all as I always like to do, I'm gonna be honest with y'all. I did not know what to expect with this show, so I definitely didn't want to go back to season 1 or season 2. Now, one of her friends had conveyed to me that season 2 is for the dudes. So I may go back and look at it, but I don't know, man. Let me know how you guys feel down below with this recap here, and we'll get into it. So what we're going to do just for a trial period is just see how this goes, right? And if it goes well, it goes well. I'll continue with this series. I mean, there's only 6 episodes for this series right here, and then we'll go from there. But for right now, we're going to deal with Queen Charlotte, a Bridgerton story, 6 episodes. So the episode we're getting ready to get into is for season, damn it ain't no daggone season. Episode number 1, titled Queen to Be. Alright, y'all, so we kicked this episode off with the young Charlotte walking through this nice-ass crib, right? And as she's walking through the hallway, she notices a room where the door is ajar. So she walks up on this room, and she notices 2 guys in this room. Now, at this time, we don't really know who's in the room, but we later find out that one of the individuals was her brother. And we'll talk about him a little bit later in this episode breakdown. So anyhow, as you know, the conversation is going, they shake hands, and her brother, at the time we really don't know who he is, he's signing off on the document. So from there, you can tell obviously she's displeased with what she's seeing right now. She gets pissed off, knocks over the little statue right there, and then she runs down the hallway. And I'm like, daggone, what did the statue do? What did it do? So anyhow, the next thing we see is the gentlemen who were in the room along with her brother. They're running out to see what happened, right? So from there, we see Charlotte coming outside of the house. There's a carriage out front, and she's turning around looking at the house like, dang, this is the last time I'm gonna see this crib, right? So I'm like, what's really going on? So from there, we see multiple carriages traveling along this path, and then one specifically, we see both Charlotte and her brother. Now, they're having a conversation, but her brother can tell that Charlotte is upset about something, and he really wants to know what's going on with her. Now, she's sitting in this seat uncomfortable, and without her saying a word, you can pretty much tell that it's over for her in her mind. Like, I'm just over all of this tight dress, all of this. I'm ready to go back to the crib. So anyhow, getting back to the story, we see where her brother Adolphus is telling her that he understands how she's feeling, and Charlotte is like, really? Do you really understand how I feel? Now, ladies and gentlemen, we already know what that means. Regardless of where this sister is from, she could be from Germany, America, Nigeria, Australia, wherever the heck ever. When a sister says, do you really? You already know that she's about to tell you about yourself, right? So she's like, okay, just so you know, and so we're on the same page, I'm neither upset nor emotional at this moment. But what I am is angry. And as a matter of fact, the chick can't breathe in this daggone dress that I'm in with whale bones and all of this. You see what I'm saying? That's where she is right now. Now, I'm going to be honest with y'all. That style right there, you know, to each his own. Back in the day, that's what they had to do. That's what they had to wear. But, you know, it looks nice, but it looks heavy as well. So I can only imagine the type of pressure that she's under with, you know, everything that's underneath the dress as well as on top of the dress, all right? So I don't know how they made it, but she described some whale bones and all of that stuff. So I'm like, you know, maybe I need to do a little bit more research on that. That sounds interesting, right? So anyhow, going on from there, though, you know, she's like, look, there's a reason why they chose me. Like, they could have chosen anyone else, but they decided to choose me because he tells her that she was chosen. Like, there was nothing else for him to do. Who was he to go up against the most powerful people in the world at that time? Like, we're just from a small town in Germany, but, they chose you to be the queen. And she was like, well, who am I? Because, truthfully, I'm a stranger to them, and they are strangers to us. So don't play me to be ignorant. And I was like, dang, like, okay. So, her brother has to own up, and he was like, look, I don't know. You're right. I really don't know. I really don't understand. But what we do know, it is an honor, and it's going to help our country. All right. At the end of the day, he has to have this conversation with his sister because she's uncomfortable at this moment. And as a matter of fact, she really wants to turn this daggone carriage around, but he was like, absolutely not. He goes in on her, but he has to understand. And I think that he does start to understand a little bit her frustration because you're forcing her to do something that she really doesn't want to do. So he has to break down the fact that this is going to be beneficial for our country. And I know you don't want it, but you were chosen. And who am I to go up against these people, right? And just like a true sister would that has her head on straight, once she understands the game plan and what she needs to do, she typically falls in place and she does what she needs to do to make the situation work. All right. And I ain't saying that for all women, but I'm just saying when she has her head on right and you really respect her and you tell her what needs to be done, she can understand that. And she can get the thing popping, all right? So going on from there, she tells him to sit back and she got this, right? And they look at each other. He sort of smiles a little bit because he knows his sister. So going on from there, we see like a present day version of Queen Charlotte. She's walking throughout this house and we see her accompanied with, the servants and people within the palace or whatnot. So as she's walking through, we also see this carriage pulling up to the outside of the palace as well. So there's a doctor inside of the carriage who's coming there to notify the queen of someone's passing. All right. So when he comes in, Queen Charlotte is like, is he dead? Now she's talking about the king. Now, he was like, well, and he's real hesitant to really say anything at this moment. So she was like, okay, well, is he dead? Like, what's the hold up? So the doctor is like, oh, you talking about the king? No, the king is alive and well. He's good. But who I'm here to tell you about is your granddaughter. Now, before he got that information out, the queen was threatening him, talking about if I can go back to the times when I can, do that thing when your head would be rolling, it definitely would be doing that right now because you pissed me off. You done woke me up out of my beauty sleep and all of this good stuff. And I'm like, that. So anyhow, he finally tells her about the situation. And of course, that's a problem because she's the only heir to the throne. So after that news, we see them printing out the newsletters and all of that good stuff, the obituaries and all of that stuff to report. And we hear this voice of this lady named Lady Whistledown. Now, the reason why I said that is because that's a cool name, right? Lady Whistledown, that could be a hip hop name. If there was a rapper out there named Whistledown, that would be hard as heck, man. I'm gonna be honest with y'all. So anyhow, she's announcing the death of the granddaughter of King George III and Queen Charlotte, who died in childbirth along with the baby. Now, there's a guy that I later found out that is Queen Charlotte's son, right? Now, he's boo-hooing. He's crying his eyes out. Queen Charlotte's sitting over here just patting him on the back, talking about prayers and all of this good stuff, right? So I'm like, what in the world? She's not even emotional about this thing. So, as we continue, we hear Lady Whistledown going in on, the royal family. So she's talking about while they're grieving the loss of the Princess Royal, that the people themselves are grieving more for the future of the monarchy. And she states that the crown has a crisis on their hands. And I'm like, uh-oh. And it don't stop there because as Queen Charlotte is walking throughout this house and we see all of these family portraits or whatnot, Lady Whistledown is steadily discussing the queen's business, right? And I mean, she's going in, right? Questioning if the queen is nothing but talk. Is she really about all of that when it comes down to marriage and all of that good stuff, right? So from there, we see all these people in a room dressed in, their high-end garments or whatnot, at least at that time, right? Watching this woman parade around Charlotte. So in my head, of course, I'm like, what is she doing? Like, why is she doing Charlotte like this? So she's asking Charlotte to see her teeth, her fingertips, her hands, and all of this stuff all the way down to her childbearing hips. And I'm saying that for a reason. So it's at this moment that we find out that this woman will be her soon-to-be mother-in-law. So I was like, okay, so this happens to be the king's mother. So she tells her that her only job is to bear her son as many babies as possible. And Charlotte has this look on her face like, for what? And not in those words. Y'all fill in the blanks wherever you want to fill it in. So Charlotte wants to know if she'll ever be able to, have the opportunity to meet the king before all of this goes down, of course. And, while she's talking all of that good stuff, the queen is licking her fingers and checking to see if her tan was permanent or not. And I'm like, hell no. So from there, the queen calls for Brimsley. Now, there's a gentleman over there that's going to be her assistant by the name of Brimsley. Brimsley is to take Charlotte to be fitted for her gown. But Charlotte is like, no need. I already got a gown that was handmade in Paris. Now, the queen has to school her on traditional English gowns that will be worn at this ceremony. Most importantly, it's our fashion and it's for our family, so you're going to do it. Regardless of what you're talking about, the rebuttal is not needed because we already got it. All right? So going on from there, we see her brother who comes over to tell her well done and that he will see her at the ceremony. And Charlotte was like, no, but by that time he had already jettisoned, right? So he just simply left Charlotte and Brimsley in the room together. So going on from there, since we're talking about Charlotte and Brimsley, so we see them walking throughout the palace. She's feeling some type of way about Brimsley because he's walking directly behind her, and she feels some type of way about that. So Brimsley tells her that it is customary for him to walk, at least 5 paces behind her because she wants to talk to him, so she's trying to encourage him to catch up so you can walk right beside me so I can find out a little bit of intel about the king that I'm getting ready to marry. Well, Brimsley tells her that the king is all of this and all of that. Everything that Charlotte did not care to hear, he was, right? So Charlotte found this stuff to be silly. So she's like, okay, so you've told me that he was the king, he was the ruler, and he was the monarch, but essentially all of those are the same daggone thing, right? And Brimsley's like, well, there are facts, Your Highness. And then that joker runs back down the steps 5 paces behind her. It's like, go ahead and move. And I'm like, dang. He said, I ain't losing my job on your account, right? So going on from there, we see the queen mother discussing the complexion of Charlotte, stating that she's rather dark. And the guys in the room were like, well, we told you that she was of more blood. And she was like, well, that's all fine and dandy, but, she's still very, very dark. Darker than what I expected, and this could be a problem. Now, as she's talking to the man in the room, she talks to the guy by the name of Lord Buke, and she's asking him his advice on what to do. He tells her that it's definitely going to be a problem for sure, and that they actually needed to cancel the wedding. Now, the queen mother's like, absolutely not. We would do no such thing. As a matter of fact, a problem is only a problem if the palace says it's a problem. And I like that. Like, there's no problem that we can't solve. Essentially, like, what we say goes. And y'all gonna have to follow suit. So from there, she comes up with this idea to invite, some more people to the wedding who were not invited previously, right? And of course, the wedding is 6 hours away. So the men in the room are like, okay, why are you saying this? And she was like, well, I'm not saying anything. These are the words of the king. This is what the king wants for his bride to be. So anyhow, they're getting ready to bring some diversity into the room, into the building, into this wedding, because They need to create an environment where this is welcome with this whole change up in the royal family and everything is fine, right? And since we're doing it as the palace, then you should just accept it because what we say goes, right? So anyhow, going on from there, we head over to this house where the birds are chirping outside. Everything is just so beautiful. The people are working outside. And then on the inside of the house, we hear the headboard shaking and rocking, right? There's this old dude pleasing his wife, or is he? Because the look on her face is not being pleased. She's sort of sitting there, right? While he's giving it to her left and right. Now, my wife did not tell me about this. It caught me off guard. I was like, what in the world is this? After old boy finished, passed out, took his teeth out. I forgot that part. Put him over there, told his woman that, hey, you can nap now. And when we get up, I got a surprise for you. And she was like, oh, thank you. So anyhow, as he falls asleep and starts to snore, she looks over and she was like, let me get gone. So anyhow, she heads outside, places on her robe. Her little maid servant is outside. She was like, look, I'm sorry I couldn't give you a heads up. I was like, a heads up? Heads up for what? She was like, daggone it, this is the second time today he's done this to me, and y'all didn't give me no warning. And the maid servant is like, look, the butler didn't tell me what was going down. Typically, I'd like to know before I had to get down with my husband. I was like, hold on. Wait a minute. Like, what type of arrangement is this? So anyhow, she got the bath water ready. She's jumping into the water to clean herself of her husband's juices. All right. I'm just leave it at that, right? So anyhow, going on from there, the maidservant goes on to tell her that the reason why he's excited at this moment is because of the great news that he's heard from the palace, where they are invited to come to this great wedding, right? Now, Mrs. Danbury doesn't believe it, and she has to really lay her own eyes on this invitation as well, because the maidservant does convey to her that the butler is actually the one with the invitation. So anyhow, going on from there, we head back over to the palace where we see Charlotte being fitted for her wedding gown. And as she's being fitted, she's asking Brimsley all of these questions. And of course, he's hesitant with giving her any information. So while she's standing up there, she decides to talk to the women in the room. Now, one of the ladies that was fixing her dress looks like she really wants to say something, but unfortunately, Brimsley is like, don't you say a word. Not one daggone word, right? And she shuts up and she says, you two will have beautiful children together, ma'am. And I was like, what? Tell me what I want to know, right? And don't sit up here and pacify me with, just rhetoric, right? So going on from there, outside of the palace, we see all of these carriages pulling up with the guests of the wedding. And we also see the Queen Mother who's, walking through talking about, she really wants to speak with the people who are arriving to notify them of the king's, of his intentions and whatnot. So the Queen Mother comes inside the room where all the guests are, and she lays eyes on Mr. Danbury. So when she gets in there, she starts to talk to him a little bit, and she tells him that you will no longer be known as Mr. Danbury, but now forever you will be known as Lord Danbury. You will be receiving an official, proclamation from the king's office and all of this good stuff, right? Now, his face says it all. His face is just as puzzled as his wife was at the crib, right? And since we're talking about his wife, the Queen Mother also goes on to tell her that she will no longer be known as Mrs. Danbury, but Lady Danbury. And she tells her that the members of the ton. Now, the ton was, if I can just say in layman terms, the upper class or the well-represented people of that time. That was considered as the ton. So, you must have a title to be members of the ton or whatnot. So, of course, she's gotten a promotion, and so has Mr. Danbury, right? So, going on from there, we see Brimsley running through the guests like he was running through the hallway earlier. But you could tell that he was a little distressed, because as he's running through, he's not talking to anybody, not even the queen herself, right? So, as he's heading through, he heads into this other room where he sees one of his friends standing up there, and he conveys to him that they have a problem. Now his friend is like, well, what sort of problem do we have, Brimsley? And it's almost like he really didn't want to talk to him, but he asked out of, I just want to know, right? So anyhow, while Brimsley is telling him that he's not able to find a bride-to-be, there's a gentleman sitting over here at the table, well-dressed as well, and he overhears the conversation about the wife, well, I guess the wife-to-be not being present, right? She cannot be found. So while we're talking about the wife, we head back outside where we see all of the guests, and they're going through, and you see all of these people just enlightened about the surroundings and all of that good stuff. And then we see the newly pronounced Lady Danbury and her husband, Lord Danbury. Well, one is up and one is knocked out. And that just so happens to be Lord Danbury. He's asleep, snoring as usual, and Lady Danbury cannot believe the embarrassment. But as she's looking at him out of spite, she looks up and she sees Charlotte running through. And it's almost like, is this the bride? Is this why we were invited? Is this what they're talking about when they're talking about we should be united with one another? She had that look on her face, right? So going on from there, next we see the soon-to-be Queen Charlotte running down the steps, going out into the garden, trying to escape the ceremony. But unfortunately for her, she's not able to do that. Actually, there's a tall wall in front of her with some branches on it, which she's trying to climb over, but she just simply cannot do it. But on one of them, while she's trying to get over, there's a man's voice behind her asking her what is she doing. She conveys to him that it's none of his business and that she's simply doing nothing. And the man behind her is like, well, it doesn't look like nothing. It actually looks like you're trying to climb over the wall. And so it's like, okay, you're right. All right, why don't you come over here and help me? He was like, help you do what? She was like, look, I'm just simply trying to climb this wall. And he was like, well, I'm not going to assist you with anything because I am the king. All right. So after she finds out that he's the king, she's so apologetic and all of this good stuff. So he goes on to ask her, so why are you trying to escape? And essentially she tells him the situation, like, I don't know who the king is and all of this good stuff. He could be a beast or a troll. And old boy's just sitting there like, what in the heck? Like, for real, that's what I look like. So anyhow, long story short, he introduces himself to her. She's so very apologetic. And he was like, no need. You can call me George. She was like, yes, Your Highness. He was like, no, just call me George. So anyhow, while they're getting acquainted and talking to one another, because he was like, well, what do you want to know about me? She's like, everything, right? So he was like, okay, cool. Let me go ahead and start telling you everything. Now, while they're in the middle of their good little conversation or whatnot, building rapport with one another, here comes her brother going off on her, talking about, where have you been? We've been looking all over the place for you, but he did not see the king. Now, once he saw the king, he was so very apologetic about it. Now, the king was like, no need. I was just talking to her. She was trying to escape, trying to climb over the wall. Whoa. So her brother's like, no, not today. We're not doing that. And he was like, well, actually, it's her choice. That's what the king conveys to her brother, right? So she sort of smiles from that. Actually, that's the first time that I've seen her smile this episode, because of everything going down around her and how fast it's moving. So she smiles a little bit, and then he comes over, kisses her hand, and he says, I hope to see you at the ceremony, right? So anyhow, after he leaves, her brother comes over, and he was like, so you still questioning this whole situation? And she was like, oh my gosh, I need to go in and get changed up, right? So in my head, I'm like, how in the heck are you going to change up? Like, you already got on your wedding gown, your shoes, and all of that good stuff. She was like, I'm about to show you. So anyhow, back over at the wedding, we see the king waiting for his bride to be. We hear the horns and the organ in the background and all of that good stuff. So then all of a sudden the doors open and you see her brother and the soon-to-be Queen Charlotte. And she was like, see there? I told you. So she got the fro. And I was like, oh, all right, that's what we were going to do. So that's the fro pick. So anyhow, as she's getting ready to walk down the aisle, she hears all of these whispers. She sees people staring at her, not in a flattering way, and it made her uncomfortable. But as she stood there for a moment and decided to move forward, she looked at the king and he smiled and she smiled back for a second time, and she continuously walked down the aisle, and her brother gave her to the king to marry, right? So anyhow, from there, they held each other's hands and all of this good stuff, and was, appointed king and queen. And then next thing you see is the after party. So at the after party, they ain't getting down like we get down. They pretty much tapping their toes and spinning and all of that good stuff, right? And it was cool. They cursing to one another. It was all good. You know what I'm saying? So anyhow, this is where it started to get interesting. Very, very interesting, right? Because after the after party, we saw all of the people coming up to shake their hands outside and all of this good stuff as they were leaving to get back into their carriages and whatnot. Now, her brother, Charlotte's brother, Queen Charlotte's brother, comes over, and she's trying to embrace him, but he stands off, and he's talking about prayers and all of this stuff. And I pray that you have many children the next time I see you and all of this good stuff. And that rubs her the wrong way, because that's her brother. She really wanted to embrace him, thank him for what, the sacrifices and all of that stuff that he's done. And also, I'm not going to see you. You're going back home. So this may be a forever, right? So anyhow, going on from there, next we see Lady Danbury, right? So she comes over, introduces herself to Charlotte or whatnot, and at one time she goes in a little bit closer to tell her to be on the lookout, like, don't let your guard down, but if you need me, I will be here for you, right? And Charlotte tells her, like, I'm glad you're on my court. We're going to be good friends and all of this stuff, right? And from there, the king grabs Charlotte's hand, and he conveys to her that he has a surprise for her, but you're going to have to put on your cloak before we go out, right? So anyhow, they head to what we know as Buckingham Palace, but at that time, I don't think it's known as that, right? So they got the red carpet out and all of this good stuff. So they get up out of the carriage, and, she can't believe her eyes, and she's just so giddy at this moment. So anyhow, as King George gets up out of the carriage and starts to walk up the steps, he tells her that this is her house. And she was like, okay, I'm not understanding. He was like, yeah, this is your house, and I actually got a house in Kew. And she was like, okay, so you're going to stay in Kew? He was like, yes, that's where I'm going to stay. And she was like, well, I will stay with you in Kew. And of course, he was like, no. So she goes on to say, well, I mean, it's our wedding night. It's supposed to be our honeymoon. Like, are we going to do something? Like, that's what I've read and what I've heard. That's what we're supposed to be doing. So anyhow, he was like, well, actually, I know you may be tired. You've had a long trip, yada, 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 right? So I was like, hold on, wait a minute. What type of setup is this? Like, on your honeymoon, bro? On your honeymoon. And he was like, yes. So she makes him so mad that he was like, okay, that's what you want from me? Let's go on and go in. So as he's going in, he's walking real fast, right? And she was like, hold on, George, keep up, keep up. So anyhow, long story short, they have this conversation inside of the palace where he's pretty much telling her that enough is enough. I've had enough of this conversation. I'm your king. Now, if you recall in the previous part of this show where he was telling her to call him George instead of Your Highness, now all of a sudden he's telling her to call him King. Now, she was like, okay, I thought you were George, but obviously you're not. You're the king. That your true colors are showing, right? So anyhow, he was like, you will stay here for your benefit, and I will stay in Kew where I belong, right? And she was like, okay, I won't say anything else. As a matter of fact, as he's approaching her, she steps back, and I'm like, daggone, like, what type of situation is this? And another thing that I noticed in this episode, didn't nobody move. When that man started to yell a little bit, didn't nobody move, didn't nobody do nothing, all right? Because he was the king, all right? Even Brimsley just sat right there like, dang, I should have told her something. Yeah, you should have told her something, because now she's having to sleep in her own daggone bed tonight, alone, on her honeymoon, right? What the heck is that? All right, what in the heck is that? On your honeymoon? Really? And that joker runs up out like it's nothing. Like, I'm going to stay over here in this mansion, and you stay over here in this palace. I've done some renovations, whoop, and all of that is real good, but she wants you, playboy, and you can't give it to her right now. So that's pretty much the end of episode number 1. We see her in her bed by herself wishing that she would have climbed the wall, right? And I'm like, daggone it, I wish I was there with you so I could have given you a little bit of boost, right? Because you seem like a pretty rational woman. You just feel hurt about this whole situation. Now, if I was to rate this breakdown, I would probably say I would give it about an 8.5. It was a pretty decent show. Now, I'm not saying that I'm going to watch this religiously, man, and put it out here on this platform, but I will say that it was a pretty decent show, right? So I'm going to leave it at that. I will talk to you guys soon. Make sure to like and subscribe to this channel so you don't miss shit that's going down, all right? Talk to you soon.